Now, what were the mechanics of bringing in my Chakwal constituency, NA 58, RO के दफ्तर को सील कर दिया गया. The RO's office is in the district complex. It was sealed by police and by क्या कहूँ निगरानों के निगरान वो मौजूद थे और उन्होंने वो सारा बंद कर दिया. I had gone to the RO's office at 6 o'clock. They kept cajoling me, persuading me to leave, and I was kicked out at around 7:30, 8 o'clock, which means that the RO and other people were there and they could do what they wanted. Many none of my election agents, no one else. I have all the form, the original Form 45. मेरे हल्के में 456 polling stations. The forms 45 of all these polling stations are present here. I got 1,55,000 votes. The Muslim League candidate also got a large number of votes. According to Forms 45, his vote tally was 1,29,000, which is a fairly decent number. But in the declared results, the winner was given 1,15,000 votes. मतलब है उसके actual vote जो थे उससे भी कम उसको दिया. The People's Party was given 74,000 votes out of nowhere. Their actual vote count, the PPP candidates' vote count was 12,000. The Labbaik got 25,000 votes and he was gifted with an additional 25,000 votes, which means 45,000 votes. Now what happened was, and I'll be very brief, I won't take much of your time. When the announcements were stopped on television, as I told you, the district compound had been sealed off. The presiding officers of the constituency were standing in the courtyard. And they kept standing in the cold until morning. उनसे रिजल्ट लिया ही नहीं गया. उनके हाथों में रिजल्ट्स थे, उनके पास बैग्स थे. किसी ने इतना तकल्लुफ नहीं किया कि बैग्स ले लें, उनसे रिजल्ट्स ले लें. And at 6 o'clock in the morning, while the presiding officers were standing outside in the cold with the results in their hands, the result was declared. I mean, can there be a bigger farce than this? I'll just conclude with this. Thank you.
Both Urdu and English, so that everybody present here can follow what happened. So the first thing to remember while we look at the data, the evidence that we have, is that the rigging that happened with respect to this election primarily happened at the offices of the returning officers. Now that is a very serious thing. Normally one talks of rigging at polling stations, where the accusation is that the rival candidates carried out the rigging. But once the votes have all been brought to the office of the returning officer, who is a state official, and once the Form 45, that tabulates the result at every polling station, has been brought to the office of the returning officer, one expects that the final aggregate based on the results from each of the polling stations would be done fairly by the returning officer. Unfortunately, sadly, tragically, what happened between the night of the 8th and the 9th of February and during the course of the morning of the 9th of February was a massive assault on democracy in Pakistan. Fictitious Forms 47 were created which had nothing to do with the underlying vote that had been cast on the 8th of February. The underlying forms 45 that were delivered at the offices of the returning officers were tampered with, were discarded, and completely fictitious results were created in at least 90 National Assembly constituencies. Now this raises a very serious and troubling question for democracy going forward. What is the point in holding an election if you're going to create a result out of thin air? Why should people come and vote at all on polling day if the result is going to have nothing to do with how they voted? So now what we are facing is a permanent question mark over democracy going forward. If the state officials responsible for safeguarding the election can be won over, can do what they did during the night of the 8th and the 9th and the morning of the 9th of February, then every election to be carried out in Pakistan, to be conducted in Pakistan, becomes a farce. That is why we are standing up and we are saying this farce must be reversed. If it is not, that will spell the death of democracy in Pakistan. This was not just an election fraud. This was a wholesale assault on democracy in Pakistan. And we know this followed months of suppression of the PTI workers, PTI leadership that were picked up in their thousands, the leadership as well as the grassroots workers. Our symbol was taken away in the hope that people would not know who to vote for. This atmosphere of fear that pervaded the election campaign, every day our workers were picked up, our banners, posters, steamers were taken down by official vehicles, municipal corporation vehicles across the country. And anybody who invited us to a corner meeting had his home broken into during the dark of the night. So with this atmosphere, we went into the 8th of February, nevertheless determined to allow the people of Pakistan to speak. And the people of Pakistan roared on the 8th of February. They roared back against the oppression that had been unleashed on them. This was a historic vote. We need to congratulate the people of Pakistan. I went to polling stations in dark, dingy lanes, and I went to women's polling stations that day where illiterate women were standing, queuing in lines for hours, and they had actually painted our election symbols on their sleeves, on their hands. We all had different symbols. I had a badminton racket, people underneath me, somebody had an aeroplane, somebody had a paintbrush, and they knew who to vote for. These were illiterate women and men. They had taken our symbols to their hearts. We really thought that we would have a tough time getting people to vote for our diverse symbols. But the people assured us, they said, we know who you are by taking your symbol away. This was a magnificent effort by the people of Pakistan. However, what happened was equally disgusting. We have magnificence on one side and disgusting assault on the election on the other. So during the night, in my case for instance, in A128 Lahore, throughout the day the polling stations were swarming. It was a carnival atmosphere. And the forms 45, as they started trickling into the RO's office, I was sitting there, I had gone there around 6:30 p.m. to be present. Every single polling station that had come in by 10 p.m., I had won. And the next morning when we got the forms 45, I had a lead of 100,000 over the other candidate. 100,000. But at 10:30 p.m., I was ousted from the RO's office. There is a video of that as well, I could play that. So a contingent of policemen actually physically threw me and my wife, who was my election agent, out of the RO's office. My wife stood her ground, she sat on a chair, they physically lifted the chair and they threw us out. And thereafter they created the fake Form 47 that they announced at 1 p.m. the next day, the 9th of February, which had nothing to do. Now what they did was, what's ridiculous, they could not really take away my vote, so they declared that I had polled 160,000 votes in Lahore in my constituency. This was a massive vote. This was a vote greater than any other in Lahore. But They showed my opponent, who had not actually gone beyond 60,000, as having polled 172,000 votes. This took the turnout for my constituency, NA 128, to 57%, whereas the turnout for every single provincial assembly seat underneath me, under NA 128, is 39 or 39.5%. So a jump of 19% between the National Assembly turnout and the Provincial Assembly turnout tells you everything. And I would urge the international media, the observers, to look for the turnout figures for the Provincial Assembly and for the National Assembly in the various constituencies where we say assault took place. And you will see this pattern repeated everywhere. This suggests that 110,000 voters entered polling booths and did not vote for the provincial candidate, but only voted for the national candidate and only the candidate opposing me. This is absolutely ridiculous. And this shows the clumsiness with which this assault was carried out. And we are taking all this to the courts, we have taken all this to the Election Commission, and we have our forms with us. Here I have the Form 45 that we filed in the Election Commission of Pakistan on the 12th of February. Now nobody could have recreated these forms in 3 days. We filed every single form, we've done a detailed analysis, compared the results of the provincial assembly seats, and I urge all candidates to do that, do the hard work. And it is indisputable that there was an assault of the most drastic nature on the election process on the 8th and the 9th of February. Now with this, I want the international media, the international observers to take our message to the world, to say that the people of Pakistan have been denied their voice yet again. And the consequence of this is most serious for the country. Kindly see, had we been allowed our fair number of seats, the PTI clearly would have emerged as the only federal party in Pakistan. We would have had at least 14 seats in Karachi. We would have had seats in Balochistan. We would have had seats everywhere. And we would therefore be the federal party that we actually are. But what they've done by the rigging that was carried out, they've turned every party into a small regional party. So what we have now is the People's Party as just a Sindh party. We have the PMLN, which got no more than 20 seats. With fake seats given to them, their figure has gone beyond 70. But it is clear that by fracturing the mandate of the PTI, we have done damage to the federal project in Pakistan. अब मैं उर्दू में थोड़ा सा कहूँगा, देखिए हर हल्के में आपने ये देखना है कि जो सूबाई असेंबली के वोट हैं उस हल्के में, उनमें और कौमी असेंबली के वोटों में फर्क कितना है। मेरे हल्के में NA 128 में 1,10,000 वोटों का फर्क है। ये वो वोट है जो मेरे मध्य मुकाबले को छूट डाले गए, और ये चीज हर हल्के में हुई है। जब आप नेशनल असेंबली और प्रोविंशियल असेंबली के वोटों को उसी हल्के में देखेंगे तो आपको नजर आएगा कि उस दिन हुआ क्या। इससे ज्यादा आपको कुछ देखने की जरूरत नहीं है। आप हमारे सारे फॉर्म 45 तो देख ही सकते हैं, ये ऑनलाइन मौजूद हैं। इन फॉर्मों को कोई शख्स 2 दिन में नहीं बना सकता था। हमने इलेक्शन कमीशन में फौरन ये फॉर्म फाइल कर दिए ताकि ये इल्जाम न लगे कि किसी ने ये बाद में बनाए। लेकिन इन फॉर्मों से ज्यादा जो फर्क है प्रोविंशियल और नेशनल का, वो आपको सब कुछ बता देता है। हमारा पैगाम लेकर जाइए जमहूरियत की खातिर, पाकिस्तान की इस्तेहकाम की खातिर, और सारी दुनिया को बताइए कि जब तक पाकिस्तान में जमहूरियत को मौका नहीं मिलेगा, पाकिस्तान में इस्तेहकाम नहीं आएगा। बहुत शुक्रिया।